Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining part 2 of OUTFRONT Media's Programmatic Out-of-Home discussion. I'm Valerie Vespa, VP of Brand Partnerships at OUTFRONT, and I'm joined here today with 3 friends and colleagues from WPP who are involved in varying ways to digital buying and programmatic out-of-home. So first, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves because I think you do a better job than I would. And if you could just, let people know a little bit about your roles at WPP, that would be terrific. Let's start with Mike.
Sure. Yeah, Mike Moore, Director of Programmatic Development at GroupM, which is kind of an intentionally vague title, but the main part of my remit is helping support our programmatic buying teams as they navigate an increasingly evolving or ever evolving programmatic landscape, largely on the supply side, but making sure it all kind of ties through when they're activating within buying platforms as well.
Terrific. Roey, someone said you're looking good. I love the comments. Adrian?
Hi guys, name's Adrian Witter. I am the Director of Programmatic and Partnerships at Kinetic US. I look after all of our programmatic-centric activations and some of our partnerships with data and measurement partners.
Wonderful. And lastly, but not least, Roey.
Hi everyone, I'm Franco, Vice President of Product and Innovation at Xaxis North America. I cover product and innovation, which means development and research around all the different programmatic channels that Xaxis can activate on.
Terrific, terrific. And yes, to whomever asked if the black shirts were planned, they absolutely were. So before we get started, I think it's fair to note that, this is part 2 of this now series. And I think, we just had such a great collection of audience viewerships. So we felt like we needed to bring this back to kind of add additional light and color to the digital out-of-home landscape. So again, questions from the audience and comments are certainly welcomed. I'll start at like the 25-minute mark or 30-minute mark, looking at those questions. So feel free to share. We're happy to answer any and all questions that you send our way. So I think let's begin our little discussion. In order to understand the importance of programmatic buying, I think, especially how it relates to out of home, I think I'm going to pitch my first question to Mike. It's important to start with how it all kind of began. And I think when we were chatting all together, it was like there's, probably 5, phases of, this evolution of programmatic buying. So I think we could probably spend about 5 hours discussing that. But in your, kind of brief and succinct point of view, can you share your thoughts on that sort of evolution?
Yeah, I think if you go all the way back, and it's a word we try to avoid using these days, but programmatic was really about monetizing largely remnant digital supply. So impressions that, publishers didn't really have a means to sell on a direct basis, or publishers themselves that don't have a means to sell on a direct basis. And that was very much like kind of the origin story of it. So as we went along, we added things like, audience targeting, which became sort of almost synonymous with the sort of entirety of the medium. And as we've kind of progressed, it's now just more about sort of the ubiquity of how you buy digital media. From a digital perspective, it's homepage takeovers as well as banners. Obviously, CTV is a growing medium as well, and that's a place that programmatic has, really sort of latched into. And I think out of home, we're not quite at that stage yet, but it's clearly, and I think the reason that you would bring someone like myself to a panel like this is it is getting there, and sort of as we'll kind of talk about, what are the sort of things that are limiting it from doing so, or what do we need to do as an industry to bring it to fruition?
Terrific. Do any of you guys have anything to add to that, or do you think that's a pretty good overview?
Yeah, I mean, just bringing this, rounding it out to out of home, I think it's important to note that out of home's been, had the benefit of observing how digital media has gone through these phases and, been able to cherry pick some of the best of those and eliminate some of the areas that were pitfalls ultimately for digital media at one point or another. And I think that especially now when programmatic is still in its nascent stages for out of home, it shouldn't be synonymous with remnant, because we actually do have that high impact, that high value and prestige formats available programmatically, which again is just one of the benefits of being not the first mover when it comes to programmatic development. I think out of home definitely has a benefit in that regard.
And ultimately, like looking at it from like an audience standpoint, I think it's really about the high value audiences that you can reach and intercept in a completely more meaningful way. So yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting to me is just the last 14 months or so at this point. Do you feel like there's been a new era into itself, Mike or whoever, as far as programmatic and especially from a programmatic out of home perspective? Because I feel like a lot of organizations from a tech standpoint have been able to, those that I think are looking, future forward have been really focused on advancement in tech to allow for, a faster evolution to getting to the right place we need to be in as far as programmatic buying. So do you think, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's slightly indirect answer. But I think maybe the biggest thing we've seen over the course of the past 18 months is, for at least from my perspective in media, is sort of the rapid adoption of streaming and sort of how that sort of changes, what we thought was maybe a 2-year runway has now changed into maybe an 18-month runway, but really a year for CTV and programmatic and all of that to kind of tie together. And the only reason I bring that up is in relation to out of home is I think that was kind of the last big thing to clear before everyone started looking at, okay, what's next? And out of home was for us always kind of on that next horizon. And now we're going to be there, probably a year ahead of a schedule that I've sort of arbitrarily made up, but I think was kind of reflective of what we were seeing as sort of marketplace trends. And yeah, I totally agree with Adrian. The idea of you don't always have to be first is sometimes a good thing. And sometimes it is good to kind of learn from some of the pitfalls we've seen in the past. But I think we do have great examples of people who have been first in this space, working with Adrian, working with Roey, and still seeing sort of good results, but kind of willing to take those risks along the way as well.
Yeah, exactly. You get to play to you get to pay to play. So when you had talked about in our earlier conversations, just taking a channel to maturity, can you, whether it's out of home or whatever, can you kind of explain that process?
Yeah, I think the first thing for us usually starts on the supply end. And the question is sort of when can I get most of what I need to get done programmatically? And so when we first started talking about display, it wasn't a mature platform when you could only buy sort of below the fold or remnant supply, right? And once we got sort of full coverage for basically every display impression, programmatic became sort of mostly the de facto means to buy that creative type. And I think that's sort of probably the single most important tipping point. But I think as sort of we get to true maturity, it's making sure we have things like verification in place to know that we served an ad, but we served it to the right place, or we served it to the right person, and kind of having that full loop measurement based around this is really, really important in that as well. Terrific.
So this one is a heavier one, but really, really, I think very important. Conversations around privacy and brand identity are huge right now. And maybe selfishly, I feel like those things are impacting out of home less than they are perhaps other digital media. But just wanted to get your take on that as we move forward, and maybe even Adrian, how you think out of home can kind of benefit from some of those challenges.
Sure. As far as out of home goes, as you rightly state, we are less so impacted because of the one-to-many nature of the delivery that we serve. I think some of the planning practices that we have with regards to mobile geo-behavioral data collection, that is something that is impacting the industry at large, advertisers at large. Because of the way that we typically do this on an aggregate and anonymized basis, we don't have as much of an immediate impact to the methodology that we apply. I think overall, we will just see a decrease in the overall volume of the audience panels that we use to determine, suitability of certain screens over another, but the methodology still applies, and it still will, at least for the foreseeable future. And I think with iOS 14 and the change, that 14.5, I should say, and the changes that have rolled out, the adoption of the iOS updates usually takes a little while. There's a lag from the day of release through to overall mainstream tipping point adoption. So something that we'll be keenly observing, all three of us here on the panel, but for the immediate term, out of home isn't as negatively as impacted as, you know, may otherwise, I thought.
Great. And Mike, you had some thoughts on this too. Do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think Adrian covered it well, and I think the key piece was the one-to-many versus one-to-one nature of what sort of targeting execution really mean in out-of-home compared to more traditional digital mediums. So I think there's a lot of that kind of, we need to be kind of right when we set up a campaign, and we need to make sure that we're putting maybe more effort in the planning side. Whereas in programmatic, you get a little bit more flexibility and the ability to tweak things or make adjustments, you know, kind of as you react to signals that come in, you know, much more quickly than they do in any other sort of channel-based execution. So I do think there's maybe some, I think like a common phrase now is like what's old is new, and kind of learning from some of the things we used to do when we had less. I think not that, you know, out-of-home doesn't have all the research and all the backing, but that one-to-one connectivity was never really a part of it. But there's still a lot you can do from a targeting perspective to reach the right people and get the right messaging in front of them.
Terrific. That's a great point. Going back to that idea of, you know, digital out of home or programmatic out of home being looked at from a remnant or underutilized ad impression basis. Like I think we've come a long way since those earlier days, which is terrific. And I think there's other biases that we need to kind of, you know, clearly address and get past so that we can be considered more often in the media mix. But maybe Adrian or Mike, actually, like, can you speak to sort of like the process for where more traditional mediums have gotten into the programmatic space and some of the best use cases for how to advise clients on how to buy it? Like the example I think was used with CTV and maybe setting up more regular PMPs, or I don't know, that was one example I think. But
yeah, I think the notion of like we've learned from the past, right? Like when we buy CTV, it's really only deal based at this stage, and I think we'll stay that way for, you know, at least quite some time. I think when we talk about out of home in the same capacity, it's bringing that sort of, again, the upfront planning and the investment knowledge that people like Adrian and people in his team have. When we get to programmatic execution, you know, that may be a very skilled trader on a programmatic team, but frankly, like those traders don't have that expertise of how out of home is priced, of how it's executed, of the research methodology. So I think what Adrian and I really liked is like the opportunity to explore this sort of more collaborative way of working to bring really the best of both, and not sort of overly burden potentially just one person with having to know, you know, every button in a buying platform, as well as every sort of facet of the out of home landscape as well. I think there's a way to kind of meet in the middle, and that's what we're really excited to be exploring together.
I love that.
Yeah, and to echo some of the things that Mike has brought up with some of the previous answers is, you know, if we look at it from the supply side of things, can you really have a, you know, fully fledged out and fleshed out product if you don't have certain media owners in the mix? You know, a big tipping point, I think, for the US market is when OUTFRONT went live programmatically, frankly, right? Not just to shamelessly plug you guys, but like that's a big thing for the US market to have access to the broadest spectrum of available inventory and some of the highest quality stuff in markets. Then you look at, you know, technology and screens being able to react in real time to messages and the actual trading mechanics of programmatic, as opposed to some of the lags that some of the legacy tech still had. And then to Mike's last point around, you know, people and expertise, like how do you ensure that with all of this development in supply and technology and the capabilities of the channel, that you are then able to execute on that in the best way possible? And that's kind of, you know, what us three on this call, you know, really focus on is how do you have that interoperability and a collaboration across the board to make sure we're making best use of this.
Okay, so you just perfectly segued into my question, since Roey's been really quiet and I know that he has a lot of beautiful things to talk about here. Can you explain your role in as far as productization and based upon the changes happening within the media landscape?
Sure. So my team and I are looking at anything from ideation and research in new channels that either Xaxis hasn't been activating in before, or we are activating, but it's pretty much commoditized at this point. I would say that out of home was a channel that we had our sights on for a while. And at this point specifically, we decided to take kind of a bird's eye view from a strategic perspective and look within the group, what expertise we have in the group, and see how we can tap into that and collaborate versus building our own solution. We actually launched our solution, our joint solution called Sideline, in the middle of the pandemic, which in hindsight, I think was actually the best way to show why programmatic out of home works really well. I think it showed how nimble, how agile it can be. Turnaround times shortened from weeks in advance to matters of days, sometimes even hours, depending on the execution. And it allows us, again, it aligned very much with the rest of our programmatically enabled channels.
That's great. And as far as Xaxis is concerned, what is the great interest in out of home? Like, what do you think speaks to them as far as?
Yeah, so we think it's a channel that's complementary and obviously a part of the entire media landscape. And it should work together with other channels. It shouldn't be siloed. I know this is a word that has been circulating in the industry for decades, but we truly believe that there is a way to efficiently plan across multiple channels based on insights that we get from the out of home side of the campaign, audio side of the campaign, display, video, etc., and make sure that budgets work efficiently at the end of the day.
Can you, like, you had written a really wonderful article, which is the reason why I think we first met each other last year. I think it was during the brand launch, I believe, right? It might have been around that same time, yeah. But you had mentioned information around like real-time data and understanding, traffic patterns. And I think as a seller, like my biggest challenge over the past, earlier, last year was around just explaining that, data confirms that people are outside of the home. And we can actually particularly look at specific markets and areas in which there's more people out of home as if like nothing is going on. And so can you explain sort of the tech that you used to figure that out and plan against that?
Sure. So just to give the audience some context in regards to that, that was when we rolled out our out-of-home product. Obviously, a lot of our clients immediately thought about divesting from out-of-home specifically because everyone personally is either in-house, in their house, not traveling as they used to be, etc. Like I mentioned, I thought it was kind of the opportunity for us to bash the misconceptions about out-of-home and how important it is in the media landscape. We used location data provided by public companies such as Apple and Google, for example. It shows that people are actually traveling around. And kind of our point in that is obviously, one, here's the data. People are traveling more than you think. Second of all, for brands, let's say specifically CPG brands, if you look at your own personal behavior, I'll give you an example. People used to change their habits around, let's say, shopping, grocery shopping. They decided to go to closer supermarkets versus the further ones that they used to go to get specific products. That is the best time to try to sell or try to introduce a new product and get that hook. We have very sophisticated brands that acknowledge that, used it, that was very successful. And I think that data-backed proof that we gave obviously helps a lot with just getting clients' trust.
Fantastic. It's all about the sort of tangible outcomes and creating those use cases where we can prove it out, which is great. It's truly successful. So future forward thinking around new products, really, that can help the media landscape that you might be helping other channels right now that you think could really help with out of home. You did mention something around AI. Do you want to share some of those kind of future forward products that are kind of cool and interesting for people to think about?
Sure. So some of the people in the audience might know that we have an entire artificial intelligence division within Xaxis called Copilot. We build custom algorithms for our clients. We work on different types of DSPs and obviously different types of channels. And the proof is basically in the pudding. Wherever we apply these algorithms, the machine obviously does it better than anyone else at the end of the day. and we see significant improvement in performance. And obviously, it's tailored by specific KPIs. And we already in our roadmap, we're planning on seeing how we can incorporate artificial intelligence to out-of-home planning. And the way we're planning on doing it is providing a feedback loop to the out-of-home side of the planning phase from other programmatic channels. So if we saw an uptick in performance in specific channel, let's say audio or display or mobile, let's say in a specific geo or even a specific audience segment, we can pass that back and pretty much optimizing as close as possible to real time on the out-of-home side, which I don't think has ever been seen before. And like I said, at the end of the day, we want to make sure the programmatic out-of-home is as close as possible to what we can do in other programmatic channels. And that feedback loop goes on and feeds both ways, by the way.
I love it. I mean, I think it's important for the audience to see sort of like where we're headed and sort of where we're thinking this medium can go. And there's like no limit, right? So it's exciting. Yep. Mike had mentioned in some of our earlier conversations, something along the lines of we sometimes forget that we are pushing a creative message because we're so kind of deep into the thinking around optimization and results driven kind of goals. I might be completely butchering what you said, but I think that was what you were implying. And you were meant to be kind of funny about that. But when leading with creative, what types of products do you see integrating with out of home with the goal of, again, leading with creative messaging? I mean, I think when I think of out of home, I think of how important the creative is. I'll never forget when we kind of connected our pipes to a couple of SSPs, we got creative that said, click here for more info. And I was like, So do you want to share some thoughts on sort of integrations that can help with that? Roey, I know, Adrian, you have your thoughts too. Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I'll take a quick, also maybe just a step back. And part of the reason I just really enjoy talking to Adrian and Roey about this, even though it's not really part of my day-to-day, I think there is something about out of home that makes you sort of step back and realize like you're talking about a real world thing because it's a thing you see in the real world, right? Like when we talk about installing a programmatic billboard, there's someone up there installing it. When we talk about like installing a header wrapper, which is like a digital thing, someone's just kind of coding it into a web page, and that's uniquely challenging in its own right, but it's just very different, right? And I think when we think about out of home and that creative element, it makes you kind of step back and imagine like what someone would look at when they see it, as opposed to like digital where it's like, well, they're online, so they're an internet user, so they're kind of more the same. And I just think there's something really interesting in there of like, how do we make sure the messaging and using sort of programmatic as just an easier means to distribute that messaging out on like a per geo or per region basis. That can be, ideally sort of small tweaks that can kind of go a long way to keep the overall message the same, but its delivery maybe more localized or more thoughtful in how it will impact that end consumer. So they're not trying to jump up off the highway and click a button to activate a coupon.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that like going to Mike's point, it's you see this a lot with some of the biggest spenders in the out-of-home channel being those who don't necessarily have a real world presence, and they're kind of cashing in their virtual capital in the real world, right? Amazon, Googles of the world, and doing it effectively so because again, it's a tangible real world asset that brings your brand to life. It's really making it have that jump. I'd love to see the adoption of some of the creative assets from social media making their way into out of home. I think they are uniquely, out of home is uniquely situated to really boost and amplify that in a way that maybe wasn't the original intention as it was built for specifically a Snapchat or Instagram, but it is just uniquely placed to do so in a way that completely takes it to another sphere in terms of its reach and resonance with audiences. And we have all of the formats that are able to do so. And in some cases, we've seen that as of last year, but I think some of the smaller place-based environments that ultimately were closed due to the pandemic and would have otherwise, I believe, seen a massive uptick in these types of spends last year. That's what I'm excited to see come back this year, as well as all the billboard stuff. I'm not partial to billboard myself, but truly, I think is going to help advertisers really to act expansively on their out-of-home planning and buying.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that before, Roey, I know you have some thoughts on this. I often get like, oh, we only buy nationally. And, my thinking around that is like, okay, you know how to best to deal with your business. But, when you think from a US perspective, but what I found really lovely the past year is larger national brands looking to communities and looking to really delve into the differences that exist in creating a sort of creative messaging that resonates, like you mentioned, like much better in smaller pockets throughout the country. And I think again that goes back to this thing of brand identity and authenticity that I think out of home really lends itself well to, and programmatic can really support that from a data perspective. So, but really, I know you'd mentioned stuff about out of home and gaming, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about that point, that I think a lot of people may associate the one-to-many type of medium with the lack of ability to hyper target, which is wrong. And I think this is what also programmatic out of home, but also the increasing amount of very, very specialized media owners. It can be in taxis, it can be in gyms, it can be in very, very specific places. Being able to very hyper target audiences is a key factor to it. And what I'm a true believer in the creative messaging. We talk a lot about the mediums and how efficient we can target specific audiences, but at the end of the day, creative is, I think, king. I also think that we're coming to a reckoning that the lines are being blurred between the different channels. So one example is that we're now having audio out of home in supermarkets, which are basically speakers within supermarkets that can serve audio ads to people in supermarkets. Now, does it come from the audio budget? Does it come from the digital home budget? In my opinion, it's audio creative. We can serve it anywhere. We can serve it in a car, in GTA, in a game, or we can serve it in the headphones of someone running on the street. I think, and my point about gaming, we're consulting with the Kinetic team, who specializes in out of home, for in-game advertising that includes out of home units within a game. So if you're in a city landscape and there's an out of home unit, we're treating it as a out of home medium, even though it's in a gaming. So again, I think all these lines are being blurred will be even more blurred in the future, and I think it's great for the industry.
Agreed. No more working in silos, right? So
Roey, I was going to say you forgot the shopper budget too as a potential other source there.
True.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking to that, I'm amazed at since we've connected to a bunch of SSPs, the interest level from a CPG perspective, which is really, again, really interesting and new for us, being OUTFRONT and primarily being roadside billboard platform. So it's interesting to see that they too are understanding the need for sort of this channel. So Adrian, we've touched upon Sightline, but it would be great, to kind of understand from your perspective what it is and why it was formed.
Yeah. Sightline is a partnership between both Xaxis and Kinetic that offers ultimately the best of both worlds, right? So you've got the out-of-home expertise, the endemic tools for the channel from Kinetic, and then you have the programmatic best practice and expertise from Xaxis, and the ability to weave the out-of-home medium and the benefits of that into their overall product mix. I think it's a very powerful matchup that offers our client base and the entirety of GroupM massive benefit, and it's also somewhat of a newer approach in holdcos overall in terms of these two sister agencies, sister entities within a group coming together to build something that is the best of both, for all involved, as opposed to the silos, keeping silos. And I think that is a really big deal for everybody involved, in that kind of laid everything out on the table and went ahead and put our best foot forward. created the partnership. And as Roey mentioned, it's over a year old now, and going, really well in terms of the feedback we're getting from clients, but also the engagement that we're getting from all of the teams across the agency that is, facilitated by, three of us here, really ensuring that there are key touch points and, points of collaboration where everybody gets a very clear idea of what the proposition delivers. And that's a key piece, the delivery, not just buying out of home programmatically, but delivering back to an outcome, right? Delivering back to a form of measurement. And so, that is Sightline in a nutshell.
And with this integration, like interagency, like when you're speaking to them about this proposition, like what is kind of their aha moment around out of home? Is there something that like lends itself to like, wow, I didn't know like this was the possibility? Is it around data? Is it measurement?
It is, I think there is a lot of antiquated perceptions about out of home and its capabilities, especially when it comes to the more advanced levels of media in terms of programmatic, and ultimately just the level set on that is usually the aha moment, let alone the the lengths that we've gone to integrate all of our operations and the technology into other products within the Xaxis suite or other workflows amongst our GroupM agencies. I mean, there's a couple of aha moments.
Yeah, I mean, our internal education for our sales force is like, just go out and talk about out of home, and that's what you need to do, whether you're speaking to a traditional media buyer of sorts versus a digital media buyer. It's just proving out the value. And speaking of the tech, advancements that lend itself to buying it this way.
Absolutely, and I'd like to also just say, like the supply, all of our media owner partners and the significant investment that's being put forth, the hundreds of millions of dollars to, retrofit traditional boards or upgrade the existing digital boards that went out when, the technology didn't exist to truly be available on a programmatic real-time basis. I think that's no small piece of work, and, something we greatly appreciate, and is, the largest growth factor for the adoption of programmatic. The more inventory that we have on a national basis, we're going to start opening up the opportunities for clients and budgets that weren't otherwise at the table.
So I'm looking at the questions that we're getting, and also some of mine that kind of lend itself to, like, my question to you, Adrian, was, what do you recommend for those who are media publishers or out-of-home media publishers in the audience? What do you recommend to help make your job easier? And I would probably think it would mean supply, but more supply.
Yeah.
But conversely, one of the questions was, lends itself to this as well. Are the outdoor media owners investing enough into their tech teams to fully support programmatic? And so I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, to your point, supply is kind of the lifeblood of the programmatic offering. So any efforts to bolster that, greatly appreciated. I think beyond that, evangelizing the out-of-home medium is really something that we could all look to participate in, because again, as I mentioned, a lot of antiquated points of view on what it can and can't do. And I think the collaboration between the teams, any way to deepen the collaboration is going to prove beneficial. You will know from the the collaboration that we have, like, how beneficial that is, and I just would echo that to all other media publishers who are looking to truly engage in the space and ramp up their efforts in programmatic.
Great. And then what do you recommend clients and agencies who might be listening should consider if they're not currently considering out of home? What do you think are sort of the key benefits of buying out of home programmatically?
Where to start?
We kind of talked about that.
Where to start? I think I would say come to media planning with an open mind, and not, we the three of us here kind of rail against the word agnostic, because it sounds like you don't have an opinion. We say media neutral as opposed to agnostic. So understanding that if you have a scope and a brief for our audience and a goal that you're trying to drive for the business, if out of home is determined to fall within that, not to recoil because, again, of your an antiquated point of view on particular formats, or trying to like actually have the conversation with the team, my team, or any other team that you're talking to, your whole co, to actually see if it does make business sense, and ultimately the use cases and case studies that are affiliated to an activation of that sort, so that you can feel a bit more secure in actually having that run for you.
Great. Another question someone sent us was around like luxury brands and whether or not, what is the value prop to luxury advertisers being in the digital out-of-home space programmatically, knowing that there has been this sort of bias of it being remnant, or all of the supply that's on there is undesirable. And also the second part of this question was sort of the benefit of advanced targeting. So like thinking or cherry picking units, as we call it, picking specific, like location specific assets, still a valuable way of using the programmatic channel. Because you're right. I mean, like I think there's this evolution as well from like a buying behavior for out of home, where we've always looked at it from a location standpoint, as far as like what's the best location, and there's always a little bit of that, right? But I think there's, we're trying to get everyone to be on board with this idea of audiences and impressions, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this speaks to something that is a core principle of the Sightline offering overall. And, all three of us on this call are aligned to, is that, don't lie to yourself about what you can and can't do. If there is a buy that is best placed to be majority bought on a traditional and direct basis, call that out at the briefing stage. Really don't succumb to the programmatic buzzword in out of home, like the way it was done in other channels before out of home. And that's something that we've done in an effective means for a number of clients throughout the entirety of Sightline. We started that way and we're going to continue that way. And I still think there is legitimate case based again on the KPIs of the client ultimately, which is the core focus of any campaign, that may trend towards direct over programmatic, and so be it.
I always have in my mind the chief product officer out front. He always uses the example of like, I might be searching for like, articles about healthy living and, how to make a salad or something, and then, leave my office for lunch and go to an unhealthy, I don't want to name a brand, but to some, very not healthy food place to order food. And so it's like what your digital persona is, could be very different from what your actual, in real life persona is, which I always come back to as location, everything, right?
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
So anyway, let's see, there's more questions here. So with wide scale reopening across the country, what digital out of home venue types are you most excited to activate programmatically, with the exception of OUTFRONT, who is, hosting this event?
I would say, if you guys make the subway, when you get me the subway, that would be the one. I think, we're all, people are heading back to the offices now, like once a week, twice a week, whatever the case may be. Real life is returning. I think that's definitely one, cross transit. And then really,
and what's interesting, like as we measure ridership, it's amazing, like the increase over weekends too, that has elevated, with a unique change from kind of historically. So it's amazing to watch kind of nuances.
Definitely. There are a couple. I could run off a list of so many. I mean, and I'm sure the guys have their own too. But yeah, there's a number of them that I think, as of this year, and New York just had its reopening as of yesterday, and it's usually a bellwether for out of home in the country and people's perceptions of people being out on the street. So hoping for a lot more influx and openness to the other formats going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian Dallimore, as more out-of-home specialists get seats and the growing number of omni-channel DSP competition in space is going to become tight. I guess out-of-home space will become tight. CPMs will continue to rise as demand increases, right? So how do we make sure we aren't just moving revenue around that we would get on the traditional side? Shouldn't the publisher focus on the omni-channel DSPs first?
So if I understood that correctly, it's in two parts, around the platforms themselves and then the squeeze on the market overall. So on the platform side, I'll answer, and then if you guys want to talk to some of the trends that you've seen again across other more mature programmatic channels with regard to the squeeze on inventory. With omni-channel platforms, as Mike had mentioned at the top of the call, they've had a very clear focus and mandate, which is on connected TV, streaming services, and the boom of video content proliferating everywhere and on a digital basis. They're still not monetizing that as much as they would otherwise love to. And so the development continues apace in that channel for those dollars. Still the biggest dollars out there in the media landscape. However, again, the pandemic has almost given the platforms a chance to redirect engineering resource or double down on out of home as a accelerated channel to develop. And so we've definitely seen that, and it's exciting, to have all this attention paid to the channel and some of the best in the game in terms of the the platforms and people with the best tech infrastructure paying attention to out of home. I look forward to, I think we're going to hit a bit of a tipping point, sooner rather than later, where the features are near parity with some of the out-of-home channel-specific DSPs. And then we can have the conversation about what advancements they make beyond that. And that's what I'm excited for, I think, more than anything. And I'd say we're still a little further off than we would like, but it's coming soon enough. And at that point, something we do very candidly is have conversations with all the key players in the market. We work with them across so many other channels to have a clear and transparent update on where they are with their progress. And we continue our evaluation of our partnerships across the board accordingly.
Yeah, and I think like paralleling to the omni-channel DSPs are really evolving the ways in which to enhance the buyer's experience in buying out of home because there is this growing demand. And I actually think if the evolution of tech and making it easier for buyers on an omni-channel basis to buy out of home becomes easier for them, where they can actually plan against it, then I think the demand will grow that much greater. I think it's just as tech evolves, the demand I think will also evolve and grow.
Absolutely, and it's going to be interesting to see if the technology for buying develops and accelerates past the overall available supply. Because it's not easy to get everything digitized and up to scratch for programmatic. So to Ian's point around CPMs, yeah, I mean, there could very well be a sign very soon where there is more of a crunch, as he had said, around CPM pricing. And yeah, again, I'll defer to the guys in terms of how this is played out across other channels and the ways in which, we've looked to navigate that.
I'd love to know what you guys think about.
Yeah, I would say that the moving the money around question is a fair one, right? Of how do we make sure that the value in and the value out creates a net positive for everybody? Again, I think there's lessons learned in sort of the evolution of where programmatic has been. And Valerie, you mentioning you got bad creatives that create kind of a weird sort of consumer experience, kind of goes to the idea working directly, you're working with trusted partners, working transparently around what are those sort of costs across the supply chain, sort of helps sort of illuminate some of those or get ahead of some of those issues we've seen in the past. I think there's also this sort of marketing nirvana-ish type of thing around, I put the exact right ad in the exact right place and I can actually afford to pay more for that than sort of a more scattershot approach. And, I know sort of at the beginning of this call, we talked about out of home is more of the one-to-one medium or one-to-many medium. but I think there's still potentially a lot of waste in like a static billboard. We talked about like the breakfast on the highway example. If that's only relevant half the day, half that impression load is waste. If you can just switch it out to be digitally enabled, you now have two sort of opportunities where you only had one to serve that right message and to the right people, commuting in the right direction. So I think there is sort of the concern around what does programmatic do and from a technology perspective at a cost basis, but hopefully we can kind of move beyond that and look at more of the value that it creates in allowing buyers to really be where they want to be in those exact right moments, in front of enough eyeballs that are relevant to justify pricing accordingly.
Absolutely. And I think also another, like the series of conversations that I've had over the past year with different data partners around attribution, it's like first time conversations, like they never really understood how out of home fit into the ecosystem of measuring out against various KPIs or how it impacts other channels. And I remember, a very brand specific conversation I had with a bunch of people in the room. And I was like, well, wait a minute, like, okay, we can measure to this one KPI of, people applying for whatever it was that they were applying for. But what about how out of home impacted search and social and all these other things? And there wasn't that, and this was a little while ago, but like not that long ago. So it's like connecting those dots for data partners to then share that offering back to their clients that they work with on a regular basis is like imperative. And I think now that we're getting smarter about talking to those partners about that is half the battle too, I think, as far as driving, CPM, if demand becomes so high that CPM also grows significantly, at least we can validate it with saying like our data partners are able to, prove out why you're paying this higher CPM because there's the value there, right? So I don't know, am I rambling?
No, I think I was just going to say, I think it ties nicely to kind of what Roey was talking around, how Copilot brings in, it only works when it can see the data and see the result. And if you can bring that all together, into a single set of platforms, you can actually make the adjustments where you need to. And I think that's where it gets really powerful. It's not just, we saw it work, so we're going to do something different next time. It's working right now. Let's do more of that and less of this. And doing that in more of a closer to real time, maybe not, millisecond, but day to day and making those optimizations. I think does help unlock that value set.
Oh, I can't hear you. What's so odd? Yeah, you're off.
Now?
Now you can.
Okay. Sorry. I was saying that we're selling actually Sideline as a full funnel product suite. We're showing and proving that programmatic out of home and out of home in general can drive performance across the board in the marketing funnel. And to Mike's point, yes, capturing that data, proving that, linking the attribution to it. We're working on some more sophisticated technological solutions to bridge these gaps, especially where more privacy controls will be introduced to kind of mass markets. But that's kind of the way we're looking at it in the future.
One of the questions was, what are you guys doing for attribution currently or on the roadmap? Are you working with out-of-home measurement partners to tie exposure back to online and offline actions in a way that's visible in the DSP dashboards?
We are undertaking a, to Roey's point, a holistic kind of full funnel approach to measurement. Anything that can be captured from, awareness consideration to conversion and retention. We are, working with a variety of different partners. I'm going to give away the secret sauce on this call, but definitely working across the board to, again, provide attribution and understanding how out-of-home drives outcomes across any number of different business KPIs. Yeah,
I think at this point we should be pushing that with anyone and everyone we're talking to. And then someone else is asking, do you think this allows for some of the smaller or digital place-based networks to gain a larger share of the digital out-of-home buy? I always thought that they were getting a large share.
Yeah, I would say yes, just because the traditional makeup of the out-of-home marketplace and the larger players doesn't always translate over to the programmatic world or even the programmatic world in a specific market. So in order to get market coverage, there may be a local, regional, or national player who otherwise is place-based that just has a leg up in that market, and as a result is preferential for the particular client by, assuming it passes, contextual relevance checks and whatever else that we apply to the buy. Yeah, absolutely, there's opportunity there, and I would think that with the market reopening, this is it's a golden time for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I think programmatic, there's less of this like, hey, I'll hook you up. Like, it's more of like we're proving to our client, like, this is where their audience is. And I think, Roey, you would mention that too. If you're like, we're using data to inform how dollars should be spent. That's the first and foremost to meet certain KPIs. And if we can really connect closely to how we're meeting those KPIs, and I think that's the golden path there.
And I want to reference, I think, a question that was asked earlier on. I don't know if we addressed it directly, but it was around luxury clients.
Yeah.
And how do they make sure they maintain, because I know luxury brands in out of home historically have had quite, let's just say, strenuous settings around how they look to buy their out of home. They've got very tight, very, very tight on that. And replicating that in programmatic isn't always the best use case for them. And therefore going direct is, very commonly a route that we send them. I think that with the sophistication that is developing in the market, more inventory being available across the inventory types that they are preferential to, that there is more and more of a use case for that, and something that has to be looked at on a campaign by campaign basis, but definitely that there are use cases for programmatic to be used, whether it's on its own or additive to what is already direct buy. There's any number of ways that we can look at things now because of the footprint that we have across.
And I guess we have to all just be comfortable in the fact that this is a nuanced buy. OUTFRONT Media is a REIT, a real estate investment trust. Primarily, we are a very large landowner, like real estate owner, or so with that comes the fact that we have real estate, and so the visual of these pieces of inventory, it's like an apartment, like when you're you're buying an apartment. So I think that does definitely create a nuance as far as certain types of buys outside of just audience and impressions.
Yeah, and I would just add too, what we've kind of seen in that vertical as well, and some that are kind of similar, and just the sort of sensitivity around environment. One thing we do try to stress is programmatic is, among other things, largely about giving buyers a lot of control. And that control can ensure that they're in the spaces that they want to be in. If they only want to be in 2 or 3 spaces, completely agree with Adrian, direct is probably the best place to go. But if they don't want to go broader because they don't feel comfortable, I actually think programmatic can help unlock some of that, of saying, Adrian's got all the tools that say, this is this exact billboard, here's a picture of it, can we approve that? And you obviously can't do that for every single billboard in the country, but if you start kind of using that as what are the criteria, you can start building sort of these lists that are more comfortable. And again, the clients are aware that we're using that, and that's the only place you'll serve into. So in some ways, I think it can be helpful, but it certainly is a journey to get there. And one we know can be a long one for some clients, and that's fine too.
Right.
So I think the national footprint as well is also just continuing to be something that proves beneficial for programmatic buys specifically, because of sometimes the cost prohibitiveness of buying national on a direct basis.
Agreed.
Programmatic offers you that capability, even if it's on a short overall flight window or whatever the case may be. You can do so on a programmatic basis. Again, to my point, using all of those targeting and delivery parameters to isolate your buy to exactly where and when you want to actually be live.
True. So I think this will be our last question because we have 5 minutes left. So what do you look forward to seeing as far as progress in the digital out-of-home ecosystem? I think we've touched upon some of this, but maybe you can make a bit more punchier what your thoughts are on this. Free for all, whoever wants to.
I would love to see campaign planning where in the hierarchy of channels that are kind of prioritized for, creative conception or the overall campaign delivery, out of home is number 1 or 2 to TV at the very least. That's what I want. I want it to start there with the broadest canvas of the creative messaging that you could possibly deliver in the real world, and then everything else is a result. It's probably a pipe dream, but that went first.
We're getting there.
We are.
No, we're seeing some budgets that we're able to have some more flexibility and fluidity with, specifically where it aligns to, let's say, video, for example. We're able to take a portion of the budget, show the client that we can test it on out of home, see the performance, diversify, and at the end of the day, it proves itself. Plus the brand obviously gets to distribute and test other channels in the mix.
Nice.
If I had to pick one, it's a little maybe of a different take, but just the idea of more regional-based planning in all of our execution and working across, some of the expertise that sort of naturally lends itself from an out-of-home perspective around how just people are different in different geographies and how we can infuse those subtle differences into, the way we plan media more broadly, but then some of the creative concepts and how we execute that at scale and efficiently.
Yay. This is making me so happy. I know. I think creative lends itself to like much more progress, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to identify audiences much more clearly on an aggregate level and push out very meaningful creative that's contextually relevant to those groupings of individuals passing by in near real time in a better way. I think that's one of my near-term goals. I think all of these are very feasible, so I'm excited for the future. Again, you guys, thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciate this. This has been a fun conversation. I think, I'll let you know how many people joined in so we can know how famous we are. But, but thank you for helping clear up some questions probably the audience might have around digital out of home and programmatic in general. So look forward to working with you guys and looking forward to driving the industry forward. So take care and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Valerie. Great time.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.